Okay, so after we have finished some of the basic lessons about the Chinese political economy before and after Xi Jinping, now is the right time to move on to the next stage. And remember, at the beginning of the class, we mentioned that we have to put this question in a larger context, and it's worthwhile talking about what the implications might be for the global economy after Xi Jinping has dramatically changed Chinese political landscape. So remember, we mentioned that there's a question about whether globalization nowadays is in danger, and then whether China can actually come to the rescue. And as a matter of fact, back to 2017, before the pandemic, Xi Jinping gave a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and where he actually addressed people and then sent an important signal about China's role in the future globalization. And let's also read this paragraph a little bit. So he said, there was a time when China also had doubts about economic globalization, but we came to the conclusion that integration into the global economy is a historical trend. To grow its economy, China must have the courage to swim in the vast ocean of the global market. China took a brave step to embrace the global market. We have had our fair share of choking in the water and encountered whirlpools and choppy waves, but we have learned how to swim in this process. It has proved to be a right strategic choice. So, of course, through this speech, Xi Jinping tried to signal to the entire world that, especially back then, if you remember the context, that's when Trump was the president, and the United States was used to be, of course, the major champion of globalization for the entire world. But during the Trump era, it seems that obviously the United States had a second thoughts on its role in globalization, and therefore China seems to be trying to take this role instead, and trying to say now China can be the leader of globalization. And so the question for us to ask here is, can China be the major champion for globalization instead? And especially, for this class, we focus on domestic institutional setting as a major recipe for the Chinese success. And therefore, we can ask the same question, right? When we now recontextualize the question in the global economy, then we can ask whether China can actually be, up to the task which Xi Jinping, after Xi Jinping gave the speech in 2017. So, of course, one thing that we have to mention is that China has initiated a lot of new campaigns on this front. So first one, we sometimes can call that Beijing's soft balancing against the U.S., is this new institutional infrastructure, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So these are two very ambitious steps Xi Jinping has taken in order to surpass or replace the leadership of the United States, along with other Western countries. But at the same time, as we witnessed recently, the conflicts between the United States and China obviously are not limited to economic, arenas. Also, it reaches to security arena, and therefore, one thing that we have to bear in mind is that the rise of China obviously is not simple. It's not simply about its economic rise, but also about its rise in its military capacity and comprehensive national powers. And therefore, this might create security externalities of trade and economic openness. What does that mean? It means that previously, when China wasn't that strong, or when China wasn't viewed as a threat to the West, to the security of the United States or other European countries, they're more than happy to trade with China, and they're not afraid a stronger China, because back then China wasn't be able to threaten their domination in the world. But once now, it seems that they have come to the realization, especially on the United States side, they have come to the conclusion that, well, China, its growth and its rise is not simply about its economic power, it's also about its political, diplomatic, and military power. And therefore, nowadays, the U.S. and other Western countries, when they trade with China, when they invest in China, they of course will have to take into account the potential negative externalities brought to their security arenas. And that of course will will of course make it less likely for them to trade with each other. And also, coupled with that security externalities, as we have mentioned for several times, these new developments in Chinese domestic politics also pose concerns to the United States and other Western countries. The first one is Xi Jinping's political campaign and the political ideological rifts it creates. What is interesting is, and I have to mention here, is that long time ago, I think when China just started economic reforms, they seem to have a sense that this is just the political system in China, the Communist Party, and also this authoritarian regime, basically was simply instrumental, and therefore, once China can achieve another level of economic success and prosperity, maybe there will be political reforms, and that's also what a lot of Western countries were expecting to see, right? So they expect that once they trade and economically engage with China, they can bring political changes to China as well. So maybe democratize China one day. But obviously, after all these years, this never happened, and therefore now the competition between the West and China is no longer just about the competition between different economic models. It's also a competition between different political and ideological camps. It's the democracy versus dictatorships. It's the human rights versus the violation of human rights. So these ideological rifts now have become much more salient than they were in the past. And on the Chinese side as well, we also witness that the growth of the economy didn't really bring more private sectors. Instead, the Chinese state sector becomes much more stronger, and it seems that also Chinese government wants to promote this model of state capitalism. In other words, the state will play a major role in design policies, and also they even will play a major role in manufacturing sectors. So it's not neutral at all. They would, because they set policies, and therefore they would determine where the resources should be directed to which particular sector. That's all according to their political agenda. And this also shows the limits of economic engagement, right? Because it's not engageable. Previously, when the West was thinking about investing or trade in China or trade with China, they're thinking about they might engage with private actors, private companies, and that's also what they're expecting for quite a while. They want the Chinese economy to grow, but what they want the part of the Chinese economy to grow is the private sector and not the public sector. But instead, over time, what we have seen is that the growth of state sector in China now has become the most important part of the Chinese economy and not the private sector.